Stop scrolling right now because what you are about to read is not just another backstage rumor or industry whisper. This is the moment everything almost broke apart between two of the most talked about actors in the entertainment world. And if you stay until the end, you will understand why one unexpected intervention changed the outcome of a situation that could have completely spiraled out of control, and why this moment is now being described as one of the most intense unseen confrontations in recent industry memory. It all began behind the scenes of a major production event where Wang and Wang were both present for separate segments of the same large-scale program. What was supposed to be a routine backstage coordination quickly turned into something far more tense as long-standing rumors and unresolved misunderstandings began resurfacing at the worst possible moment. At first, the atmosphere was normal, controlled, professional, filled with staff moving equipment, adjusting lighting, and preparing for the next stage appearance. But those who were present later described a gradual shift in energy, something subtle at first like tension building beneath the surface, before anyone realized what was happening. The first visible sign was a change in tone during a private exchange between staff and both actors regarding scheduling adjustments. What should have been a simple logistical discussion suddenly became emotionally charged as words were exchanged more sharply than expected, and the distance between professional disagreement and personal frustration began to blur. Within minutes, the situation escalated as more people in the area began to notice the shift in atmosphere, and what had been a quiet backstage environment turned into a space filled with unease and uncertainty. The tension between Wang and Wang became more noticeable as they were briefly in the same corridor preparing for separate stage entrances, and witnesses described the air between them as unusually heavy, as if years of unseen speculation and indirect comparisons had suddenly condensed into a single moment. No one could clearly identify what triggered the breaking point, but it reportedly involved a miscommunication that reopened old misunderstandings that had never been fully addressed in public or private settings. Voices rose. Not shouting at first, but firm enough to make nearby staff immediately aware that the situation was no longer under control. And then everything escalated further. The corridor, which moments earlier had been filled with routine movement, suddenly became still as people began stepping back, instinctively sensing that the situation had moved beyond casual disagreement. At that exact moment, the energy shifted completely because Xiao Zhan arrived. He was not part of the confrontation and had no scheduled involvement in that specific backstage area, but his presence at that moment became the turning point that prevented the situation from escalating further. According to those present, Xiao Zhan immediately assessed the atmosphere without reacting emotionally. He did not rush and aggressively. He did not add to the tension. Instead, he positioned himself in a way that created distance between both sides while maintaining calm control of the environment. His first action was not confrontation but stabilization. He spoke in a steady tone, addressing both actors separately before allowing the situation to continue escalating further, and that calm presence alone reportedly shifted the emotional intensity in the corridor. For a brief moment, there was hesitation on both sides, as if the sudden appearance of a neutral, stabilizing presence forced a pause in the emotional momentum that had been building. Xiao Zhan then reportedly encouraged both parties to step away from the immediate environment, not as a dismissal of the issue, but as a way to prevent it from becoming something irreversible in a public or professional setting. The movement was slow but effective. Wang was guided slightly away from the immediate line of confrontation, while Wang also stepped back, creating physical space that immediately reduced the emotional pressure in the area. Witnesses later described the moment as a turning point where escalation stopped and reflection began. The confrontation did not continue beyond that point. But what followed was not immediate resolution either. Instead, there was silence. A heavy, quiet pause that lingered in the backstage area as both sides were separated and given time to regain composure before any further interaction could take place. Staff members quickly reorganized the area, redirecting movement and restoring order, but the atmosphere had already changed permanently because everyone understood that they had just witnessed a moment that could have gone in a far more destructive direction, if not for timely intervention. Later discussions within production circles revealed that the tension was not about a single incident, but rather a buildup of multiple misunderstandings, rumors, and indirect comparisons that had accumulated over time and finally reached a breaking point under pressure. However, no official statement was released regarding any personal conflict, and both Miles Wei and Dylan Wang continued with their scheduled appearances, separately, without further public escalation. Xiao Zhan also did not publicly comment on the situation, maintaining his usual professional silence, but those who were present emphasized that his intervention was calm, measured, and crucial in preventing further escalation. As the event continued, the show eventually resumed, but the energy backstage never fully returned to its original state because everyone present knew that something significant had occurred behind the scenes, even if it never reached the audience directly. And as the night ended and cameras stopped rolling, the situation quietly faded back into private space, but it left behind a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. Because moments like that are not about what is said publicly. They are about what almost happened, but did not. And in this case, what did not happen may have been the most important outcome of all. A confrontation that could have escalated further was stopped in time. Tensions that could have become irreversible were contained. And three names that already carry massive attention in the industry became part of a story that will likely be remembered not for conflict, but for the moment it was prevented. And in the end, that is what made this backstage incident unforgettable. Not the argument itself, but the intervention that changed its direction completely before it became something no one could take back. After the backstage confrontation was stopped, the situation did not explode further, but it also did not fully disappear. It simply shifted into a quieter form, the kind that stays in the background of everything that follows, shaping how people behave without needing to be spoken about again. Once the corridor was cleared and the immediate tension diffused, there was a long stretch of silence behind the scenes. Not confusion anymore, but reflection. Staff moved carefully, speaking in low tones, avoiding any unnecessary attention, as if even normal sounds might disturb the fragile calm that had just been restored. Xiao Zhan remained present for a short while after the intervention, not to control the situation, but to ensure that both sides were no longer in immediate emotional escalation. Those who observed him later described his approach as steady and grounded, never dominating the moment, only containing it until it no longer posed a risk of spiraling. When the atmosphere finally stabilized, he stepped back without turning the moment into something public or performative. There was no speech, no explanation to the staff beyond what was necessary, just a quiet exit from the center of attention, as if his role had already been completed the moment balance was restored. Meanwhile, both Dylan Wang and Miles Wei were taken in separate directions, not as punishment or separation in a dramatic sense, but simply to ensure distance after a situation that had reached emotional intensity. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them was no longer aggressive, but heavy with processing. What made this phase different was that no one was trying to continue the confrontation. The energy had shifted from expression to reflection. Whatever had been building earlier had already reached its peak and now existed only as aftermath. Minutes later, Dylan Wang was seen sitting quietly backstage, not engaging with anyone, his expression calm but distant, as if replaying the moment internally and evaluating how quickly things had escalated. There was no visible anger anymore, only a controlled stillness that replaced earlier intensity. Miles Wei, in a separate area, was also noticeably quiet. He did not appear agitated at this point, but reflective, speaking briefly with a staff member before choosing silence again. The earlier emotional rise had settled into something more internal, less visible but still present. The production team quickly made adjustments to continue the event, but it was clear that the backstage atmosphere had changed permanently for that day. Every movement felt more cautious, every instruction more deliberate, as if everyone understood how close things had come to a completely different outcome. Then something unexpected became clear later in the evening. According to those familiar with the situation, the conflict itself had not been about a single moment or a single misunderstanding. It was the result of accumulated tension, long periods of indirect pressure, comparisons, and misinterpretations that had never been directly addressed. The backstage argument had simply become the point where everything overlapping reached its limit. But what stood out most was not the cause. It was what did not happen. There was no physical escalation beyond control. No public breakdown. No irreversible action. The situation stopped at the exact point where intervention was still possible, and that timing became the defining factor of the entire incident. As the event continued later on stage, the audience remained unaware of what had occurred behind the scenes. Performances went on as planned, cameras continued rolling, and the show maintained its structure, but the people backstage experienced the night differently. It was no longer just another production day. It had become a reminder of how quickly things can change when pressure builds unseen. By the end of the night, both Dylan Wang and Miles Wei had resumed their separate schedules, without further contact reported between them. There was no official statement addressing the incident, and no attempt to publicly define what had happened. And Xiao Zhan also made no comment afterward, maintaining the same silence he had shown after stepping in, leaving the entire situation without an official narrative from any of the three individuals involved. That absence of explanation became the final layer of the story. Because without confirmation or denial, the incident remained what it had always been in its most accurate form. A moment that could have escalated further, but did not. And in the end, that was what everyone remembered most. Not what was said, but what was prevented.